Hello, dear friends. I am here today to share about polyvagal theory, a concept that was originated with someone named Dr. Stephen Porges. And it's around an understanding of the nervous system that, in my opinion, offers a really unique opportunity to release from ideas of blame or guilt or shame around the way that we as humans react to the things that we're scared of or threatened by. So, throughout my life, I was often described as oversensitive or difficult or overly emotional. And the people around me experienced me as quite difficult to be around. Um, and I had a lot of shame and fear about the future related to that because it just felt so awful to be a problem for other people or to have made someone's life more difficult. And what was such a relief for me when I found polyvagal theory was that I realized that um, there was a reason why I was experiencing so much sensitivity. My nervous system had really become stuck in a defense state and experienced the world for whatever reason as really scary and threatening. And in that state, I didn't have access to my executive functioning where problems can be solved and solutions found, and really where we can use language and nonverbal communication to connect with and understand other people. So it gave me the opportunity to see myself as innocent in a beautiful way, that it was really just my biology that was responding to what was going on inside and outside of me. And then once I found that grace for myself, I was able to extend it to all of the people around me who I had put in the position of persecutors and seen myself as a victim. So I am really delighted to share this with you today. And the context with which I really care about this thinking is that I really do believe we're all innocent, that we are operating off of our our nervous system's response to our perceptions of our environment, that we live in a world where pain and loss are inevitable. There's no escaping pain or loss, no matter how wealthy or spiritual or privileged you are. Pain and loss are going to be a part of your life for all of your life. And finding meaning amidst that pain and loss gives us access to something that I like to call a life worth living, which is something I learned from dialectical behavioral therapy, that we can gain the skills to live a life that's worth living, that has meaning, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the life is perfect or that it is without problems or that it is without challenges or loss or struggles. It's just that we feel like it's worth it to participate with that life because there's some meaning that supports us through that pain and loss. So with the polyvagal theory, the goal is not to eliminate going into a defense state. So we will go through these in a moment, but we understand that there are times where a dangerous situation calls for a defense state. And we learn through the understanding our own nervous systems how to notice, okay, is this defense state effective or supporting me right now? Or is it something that's more related to some past programming? And I can learn how to support myself through this defense state to bring myself back to a place where I can access my executive functioning and make some good decisions about how I want to interact with this perceived threat. So let's jump into polyvagal theory. I'm going to go ahead and bring up some slides. Okay. So with polyvagal theory, we're talking about the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve goes from our brain stem down to all around our intestines, and it interacts with, sends messages to and from the brain and the body. So it's a connection between the brain's function and the body's function. An important point here is that 80% of that information is coming up from the body to the brain. So whereas most of us think that our brain, our cognition is really driving the bus of our life, it's actually the opposite. Our body is taking in constant information from our actual biological function and the environment via the sensory pathways like seeing, listening, tasting, touch, and hearing, taking that information along with our body's function, comparing it with everything that's happened in our personal history, and then according to epigenetics, at least 7 generations back, and determining if there's a threat or what decisions need to be made, giving that information up to the brain, and then the brain is helping with making those decisions. So we have an evolution of this autonomic nervous system going from the oldest version, which is dorsal, and really was involved primarily just with digestion, so sort of everything under the lungs. This is the oldest and most ineffective. This is the freeze response, or like a play dead response, right? This evolved to add in the sympathetic, which incorporates the things above the digestive organs, so including the heart and the lungs. And this is where we get what we commonly refer to as fight and flight. So it's a little bit more effective, but still quite dangerous. If you're a little mouse and you're interacting with a tiger who wants to eat you, you're going to have very little chance if you play dead, not much chance if you try to run away or fight, but it's certainly better than just playing dead. The most recent one is called ventral, and this is one that oversees both the dorsal and sympathetic, utilizing pieces of it effectively. So like if we need to run out of a burning building, we need to pop into sympathetic. If we need to get through a very serious injury, we might need to disassociate a bit and be in dorsal. But it also uses not just these threat responses, but it uses active co-regulation, which is called, which involves connection and social engagement. So we have access not to only protecting ourselves if there's a threat, but to proactively reaching out to the collective community through social engagement to get protection and security. So most of us just understand these sort of 2 pieces of the autonomic nervous system, either fight, flight, or rest, digest. But like I said before, Dr. Porges really came up with an expansion of these. And here we see not only, we have the dorsal, which is the freeze response or play dead. You can think of that like depression and disassociation living in dorsal. Sympathetic, you can think of anxiety and panic living in the sympathetic. The fight or flight, and then we have the ventral, what oversees both, but we have these blended states too, where our ventral can effectively access a little bit of sympathetic to put us into this yellow, where we're going to have an energetic connected state. So we're calm and secure, but we're also able to do something like play a soccer game or stand up and give a performance, right? And then ventral can also tap into a little bit of dorsal to support us in this purple blended state down here, dorsal ventral, where we can slow down enough to do things like meditating, praying, and having intimacy with other people. So ventral gives us access to effective use of the sympathetic and dorsal without us needing to stay in some sort of zen, never having a threat response, because that just wouldn't be realistic for our life, where we will always be presented with loss and pain. Okay, so neuroception are those sympathetic and dorsal pieces. Those are the detecting threat response. So am I safe? Am I in danger? In a typical system that works really well, you can imagine the tiger coming, the little mouse hops into sympathetic, runs, dives into their little hole, goes into dorsal and sleeps it off, right? That's a very effective use of the neuroceptive sympathetic and dorsal. And then that other piece, like I mentioned, the co-regulation, is also designed really effectively. We reach out to other beings for support and protection, and we can do that to keep ourselves safer. Unfortunately, given our how the way society has been progressively more and more threatening, most of us have what's called a neuroceptive mismatch. So in our current society, it's very different than 500 million years ago. We have the constant threats of jobs that would risk our livelihood. We have nonstop lights and sounds and loud sounds like air conditioners or traffic that would traditionally cue to an animal that there's like really serious life-threatening danger, for example, thunder or the growl of a tiger, right? So most of us have an overactive defense system, and many of us also have an underactive defense system. So you can think of the underactive as like, I have an abusive partner and I continue to go back to them. I have a job that is really disrespectful of me, and I'm not healthy in it, and people speak to me poorly, and I'm doing things that I don't care about. All of that would typically, our body would give us cues to not do that, and most of us push past that. So that's an underactive defense system. And then the anxiety and the hypervigilance, looking for a problem all of the time, that's the overactive. So most of us kind of bounce between these two. And then in terms of co-regulation, it's designed to work so well, but when most of us are in these overactive or underactive defense states, when we have the neuroceptive mismatch, we're interacting with each other more like reptiles. So we're using only dorsal and sympathetic instead of incorporating in that co-regulation, because we often see people also as a threat. Because the people around us are under these pressures and they're reacting out of their dorsal or sympathetic, which is more like this lizard brain, we could call it. So I have pictures of bearded dragons here. Bearded dragons either are relaxed or stressed. That's pretty much all they have. They don't do connection. They don't do co-regulation. So for example, I have a little bearded dragon who, if I reach my hand in, becomes startled every time, even after years of knowing me, right? So when we approach each other with more mammalian goals, we want to connect and co-regulate and solve problems together and have intimacy together, but we're using only dorsal and sympathetic, we often end up with a lot of conflict, right? Okay, so Dr. Porges came up with this SSP system to support people with these overactive defense states. This is a passive listening program that allows people over time to listen to music that's been filtered to highlight the frequency range of the human voice, to sort of reassociate the nervous system with signs of safety so that the nervous system can move out of the defensive and into a more socially engaged state, this is one way of supporting the nervous system. Other ways which we definitely have access to, all of us, regardless of financial means or, you know, classes, whatever, everyone has access to what we call nervous system regulation exercises, or vagus nerve exercises. So the idea is that the vagus nerve that is communicating constantly with our body is strengthened or toned when we do things in one of four categories, which is breath work, vocalization, movement, and mindfulness. So examples of breath work are like paced breathing, counting your breathing. So most of us spend the majority of our time in really shallow breathing, which is associated to our nervous system with a sympathetic state. So in shallow breathing, we are communicating to our body that we are not safe. So when we take a deep breath all the way down into our belly, let it fill, and then slowly release it, we communicate to our body that we are safe. And so we can work with our nervous system to say, hey, I know that you feel scared right now. I know that you feel like something's wrong. I'm going to demonstrate to you that we are safe, because a little mouse, when it's running away from a tiger, cannot take the time to take a deep breath. So the deep breath sort of reverse psychologies the nervous system to say, hey, it's safe enough to take a deep breath right now. Vocalization, we can think of singing, mantra or chanting, deep vocal sighs, or humming. And this, again, stimulates the vagus nerve that's innervates our throat and communicates to our nervous system and our physical body, hey, we must be safe, because we wouldn't have the capacity to sit and sing a song if we were, again, being chased by a tiger. The next one is movement, and that is like yoga, taking walks, doing something like Tai Chi or Qigong, some of these really steady, stretching, grounded movements, I guess we could call them. So not like a frantic freak out, run out of terror, but more of a grounded movement. Again, like yoga, Qigong, stretching. And the last category is mindfulness or meditation. And there are a million examples of both of these, but mindfulness, we think of paying attention to the present moment and experiencing it physiologically. So that would be like, if I'm washing the dishes mindfully, I would be thinking about washing the dishes. I would be noticing the water on my hands, the feel of the plate, the feel of the sponge, noticing the smell of the soap, noticing the sound of the water and the whooshing of my movement around the plate. I would be really noticing all of these pieces and becoming very aware on a sensory level as well as a thinking level about the task that I'm doing. And you can do anything one mindfully, right? I am making this video one mindfully, thinking about what I'm doing, noticing what I'm looking at, listening to sound of my voice, etc. Meditation is where we actually take a moment to quiet into the expansiveness of existence and contemplate what's outside of ourselves, what's outside of our story. And we let go of some of the individual details of our life and contemplate some of these more expansive ideas in what could be called a detached or unattached way, and where you're working to not connect so much with your individual story. So meditation is different from mindfulness because mindfulness is very present and engaged in the moment. Meditation is an opportunity to sort of come outside of this moment, not in a disassociative way, but in a way where we are contemplating the bigger realities and not so attached to our individual story. So all of these are ways that people can access for free a support for their nervous system to bring them back into that ventral and give them more space between the threatening information and the result of that threatening information. So for most of us, we receive the threatening information. Perhaps it's a smell that reminds us of something from our childhood that was dangerous, or associated with something dangerous. Our body has a response of quickening our heart rate. Our mind names that quickening of the heart rate as anxiety, looks around and decides to tell the story. I am anxious because this line is going too slow. And then we either react by snapping at the person in front of us, or leaving the store angrily, or saying to ourselves quietly, this is because nothing ever goes my way and life is horrible. Like, we have a reaction to the story that we created about the physiological response. And what these vagus nerve exercises give us access to is understanding the opportunity to say, oh, I notice my heart rate is quickening. Let me check my environment and see if there's actually something that is dangerous. I look around and I see that there is a line at the store, but I also know that I don't have anywhere to be. I have allotted time to wait in this line to finish my shopping. And so there's no actual threat. I give myself the opportunity to take 5 deep breaths. I choose to say something kind to the person in front of me, or to notice the person behind me who does seem very stressed and ask them if they'd like to go in front of me. I make the choice to take a moment to send a friend a text saying, hey, I'm just thinking of you, et cetera, et cetera. So, or I notice, hey, I don't have time, and I make a decision and say, hey, I think that my long-term goal is to get to my next appointment on time, and I can come back to the store later. So I'm going to return my cart and take care of myself so that I can meet my goal of making it to my next appointment. Or I take the time to text my next appointment and say, hey, I just need to give you a heads up that I'm going to need 5 extra minutes, right? So all of those are choices, not reactions. And when we give ourselves that opportunity to say, is this a threat or is it not? We come out of, with that deep breathing, that lizard brain in the brainstem, and we move to the frontal lobe, where we have access to executive functioning and choice making, decision making, problem solving, and the ability to connect through language and nonverbal communication. So all of that to say, it's a lot of information, but the relief to me is that I can release this idea that I need to make the circumstances of my life better so that I can feel better, because I chased that for 35 years. And once I got one fire put out, another one popped up. And it became like one of those whack-a-mole games, right? I could never solve the problems fast enough for a new problem not to arise. And a lot of times there was 10 at once, right? And I was losing. I was just losing that battle. I couldn't get my life to be stable enough that I would feel safe and okay. And this gives me the opportunity to say, I don't have to put out any of the fires. I can take care of what's going on inside of me and say, I am choosing to take care of myself in such a way that I can create meaning through, there's many different forms of meaning, and that'll be individual. But for me, the meaning is a love for the world and a desire to contribute, right? So I can choose values and meaning that work for me. And then when I'm in a given situation where there is a fire, there's a pain or a loss, I can take the time to take care of my nervous system enough to ask myself, is this a danger? What do I want to do with it? How do I want to respond rather than just reacting? And in that, I gain the ability to have more consistent access to my executive functioning. And I tie that in with my meaning and my values in such a way that life becomes worth living in the midst of the worst storms. So we no longer have to wait for the storms to end, or the things to work out, or the relationship to be repaired, or the money to be in the bank. We have access to these free tools that, unsurprisingly, are a part of every wisdom tradition and indigenous culture. Breath work and vocalization and movement and meditation, mindfulness are a part of every wisdom tradition. For good reason. They are free, and they allow us to take care of ourselves and have access to that peace that passes understanding, right? So that we don't have to wait for the world to change, because so far it has always included pain and loss, regardless of people's position in the systems of inequity, right? There are always going to be those of us who experience those systems of inequity more harshly. But regardless of your position within those systems of inequity, both the privileged and the oppressed experience pain and loss consistently without fail. And with accessing these free resources of nervous system regulating exercises and assigning a meaning and a set of values for yourself, you can use those two things to connect in with peace and security, regardless of the situation outside of yourself. And that, to me, makes life extremely worth living. So I love you, and thank you for sharing in this information with me. And I will list some resources below where you can find out more. And I'm sending you all so much love on the journey, knowing that at certain times the storms are incredibly big. And I believe in you, that you can learn how to sail your ship using these resources, no matter how big the storm is. And it will also give you the chance to enjoy some of the moments along the way. Love you.